with Faraz Shaukutali.
And a jolly good morning to you. This is Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo, and broadcasting on TV1, the Capital Maharaja Company. And on this International Day Against the Death Penalty, we're here, joined here by Mr. Paul Godfrey, the Charge Affairs at the European Delegation in Colombo. Very good morning, Mr. Godfrey.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
And thank you for being here. How important is it, the abolishing of the death penalty worldwide?
I think it's very important. Already there's been a moratorium that's been passed by the United Nations, which has looked to move towards a worldwide abolition of the death penalty. 102 countries have formally abolished the death penalty already, and another 40 have an effective moratorium, of which one of those is Sri Lanka.
And isn't there a case for us to say that we should have the death penalty, because when we have a legal system that sort of works, and the whole judiciary and all that, appeals and all that is in place, the process is in place, and finally you have this person who is obviously not conformed to standards that society would expect, and the killing of a person is perhaps the ultimate crime, and therefore that person isn't needed in society, cannot make any further contribution. Why should they be alive?
Well, I mean, as you yourself have just put it, the killing of a person is the ultimate crime. It's really not for the state to be setting that as a way of exacting punishment for, you know, the misdeeds that have been done by people, often terrible misdeeds. I think we all understand that. But unfortunately, wherever your legal system is, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in Sri Lanka, there is no way to avoid miscarriages of justice. Since the death penalty was reintroduced in the United States in 1976, more than 200 people, innocent people, have been executed by the state. Mm-hmm. So even in relatively sophisticated judicial systems, it's inevitable that there are miscarriages of justice, and what price to put to death an innocent man or woman.
And how do you all view Sri Lanka? Is this a sort of, is this a focus only on Sri Lanka? Is it another way of saying, well, you know, we don't really believe that your judicial system is robust and balanced enough to have the death penalty, because the chances of miscarriage of justice is quite high?
Not at all. I mean, the European Union, within the 28 member states of the European Union, not one country practices the death penalty. And today, around the world, on this International Day for the abolition of the death penalty, my colleagues in Washington, my colleagues in Tokyo, my colleagues in New Delhi, in Beijing, will all be making similar representations to the governments there, speaking to civil society and the media about the importance of abolishing the death penalty worldwide. So it's nothing to do with any kind of confidence or lack of it in the Sri Lankan judicial system.
Yes, I had to ask the question because there's always the suspicion that Sri Lanka is still paying the price for some misdeed of the past. So there's some. It's a bit like when Channel 4 arrives in this country. There's still this perception that it's some other agenda.
I think at the moment, to be honest, whenever I go to international meetings, international conferences, Sri Lanka is seen as a global success story. It's often mentioned alongside Myanmar as one of the few good news stories that we have. So long may that continue.
Indeed. And what's your position now that if we can touch on the latest move by this government in Sri Lanka to take away the right of a suspect to have legal representation at the time of questioning?
Yeah, I don't. This isn't an amendment that the European Union would support. Clearly, there are conditions which Sri Lanka has signed up to under the International Convention for Civil and Political Rights, which are designed to ensure proper investigation of crimes, prevent situations where torture and other sorts of coercion may arise, and we very much hope that once the leading figures in government look at this, they will withdraw the amendment as has been laid out.
And how does the European Union look at Sri Lanka now? Do you think GSP Plus might get slightly dented because of this move?
It's very clear that it's one of the fundamental conditions for GSP Plus. So it's clearly something that my colleagues in Brussels will be looking at in a lot of detail as we move towards the formal assessment of Sri Lanka's application, which is happening as we speak now.
And is it a necessarily long process?
It's a very comprehensive process that looks at the implementation of Sri Lanka's own implementation against the 27 international human rights conventions and labour conventions that Sri Lanka itself has signed. Mm-hmm. I think overall there's no doubt that a considerable amount of progress has been made by this government in fulfilling its human rights obligations. I mean, clearly the situation in the country is much improved for freedom of the media, the ability of people, activists, to go around the country without harassment and surveillance. But there are still further steps that need to be taken in order to fully comply with the obligations that Sri Lanka itself has set itself.
When we talk of media freedom and so on, and you're the EU's man on the ground here, and when you look at the local press and the TV and so on, do you sometimes go, oh my God, did he really say that? And I mean, when we have our Prime Minister in Parliament who names journalists and berets them for writing editorials that are not entirely to his liking. We don't see that in Britain. We don't see the British Prime Minister come up and name a particular journalist from wherever and say, well, you know, you didn't write this editorial, and I challenge you to write that. When you read things like that, do you sort of say, oh my God, really?
Well, I think, you know, the good thing that we've seen under this government is that the media has the freedom to write what it wants, to be more critical of the government. Clearly, there's a adjustment process, you might call it, whereby the people will be getting used to the sorts of rather forensic criticism that exists in many countries in Europe and indeed in the United States, etc. So I think it's a challenge, but I think it's a good one, and I expect that the political culture will be more robust as a result of the media scrutiny that's now going on.
I suppose you all don't really get openly involved in these things, but how much of lobbying goes on behind the scenes?
Lobbying on human rights standards, certainly, I mean, this is something that we have a regular dialogue with a number of ministries across government about. I think, but it's far less clandestine and covert than I think sometimes people think on the outside. There's always a desire to think about, you know, oh, the conspiracy here, or this is all because of that reason. I mean, having worked in governments in Europe for 20 years, I'm afraid that the ability of governments to sort of manage conspiracies is never quite as developed as people think it is.
You, Paul, you've been you've worked in the Congo. You've got a lot of Africa experience. How's democracy and human rights doing over there?
I think, to be honest, there's a challenge for human rights and democracy everywhere. I'm not so much in touch with the day-to-day now, but clearly in places like Congo there's a problem with leaders who don't stand down at the end of their time. You have many countries in Africa where now presidents are 30, 35, even longer years in power, and that's a challenge for anyone. I don't think that's very healthy in any democratic system. So I think that's one of the main challenges that Africa faces. But the thing about Africa is there are lots of success stories that don't catch the news headlines. You don't hear very much about, say, Botswana or Zambia or countries like this that are actually doing very well, because sometimes, unfortunately, success doesn't make good news headlines in quite the same way.
Indeed. Good news is not as good as bad news. So you have that. Do you think in the past Sri Lanka has been likened to Zimbabwe and its troubles that Zimbabwe is having? Is that unfair? How much of a Zimbabwe was Sri Lanka, is Sri Lanka?
I was actually born in Zimbabwe, so it's a country I know well, but I don't think you can really make much of a comparison between the two. I think there are a few comparisons that maybe just Zimbabwe has a particularly well-educated population relative to its neighbours, and so obviously that's something that you could correlate with the situation in Sri Lanka, and so there's a very robust civil society and media climate, so that's good. Clearly you've not had a situation, and Robert Mugabe came to power in 1980, so you've never had a situation in Sri Lanka where someone has been the president or the prime minister for
that long.
Yeah, more than 40 years, or coming up for 40 years. So
yes.
That's and I would say it's a situation that's best avoided for Sri Lanka.
Tell me, in Zimbabwe, because you just said that you were born there, and I presume you went to school there. You lived much of your life.
Yeah, I left when I was a relatively young child, but I have lots of family who live there, so I go there quite often.
So the land grab from by the Mugabe supporters has sort of conspired to absolutely ruin the Zimbabwean farming industry, and we know that Britain offered to give them assistance to settle these, the people who were victims of. How did that program pan out eventually?
Well, I think the British government offered a form of assisting the redistribution of the land from the so-called white farmers to some of the majority population, but they wanted it to be done in a way that they thought was fair and transparent,
right.
Whereas the Zimbabwean government wanted to control the process and distribute the land according to its own structures. So there's a balance there, I guess, between the ability of sovereign governments to distribute and the willingness of international community to only support processes that they think are transparent and don't reward cronyism. So I think we see those kind of challenges around the world. There are many examples in South Asia where the countries have struggled with the colonial legacy of land ownership and distribution. Some have dealt with it pretty well, like in India, but not without problems. In other countries in the region, it's been much more challenging, and I think remains a problem today.
Paul, we've got some questions from our viewers. One of them says, What's the British government doing with the Chilcot report? Can we follow them?
I don't think I can speak for the British government because obviously I represent European Union.
Yes.
But I think we all saw that the report was published, and it's now for them to decide if there are any next steps that they want to follow up on.
Right. So there's no rhyme and reason about these questions, right? So here's one. It's from another corner, I would imagine. How come Lee Kuan Yew stayed in power? Nobody complained.
Well, I think there were people who did complain, and indeed there were people who pushed and ultimately were successful in making Singapore a more democratic state.
Right.
But clearly there will always be a balance between people's if people are delivering services for the people, if they're delivering wealth and prosperity for people, then clearly there'll always be a reluctance to criticise people in a way that if they're not doing that. No.
In that context, is there a case for a strong man?
Not at all. I think what we've seen in every situation is that a lack of democracy is ultimately a flaw that can fundamentally undermine very successful situations, and so the more you move away from democratic principles, the more that actually your gains become pyrrhic in terms of whether they're actually sustainable in the long term.
Through your work, this sort of promoting this abolishing of the death penalty. How bad is the? You must have been in the prison system around here. How bad are the conditions from your perspective when you look at from an outsider looking in?
Well, I think clearly the situation in prison is such that I find it odd that people would think that being sentenced to life in prison in Sri Lanka would be in any way a holiday. I think it's very clearly a day-to-day punishment from the conditions. Clearly, we would like to see prison conditions improved, overcrowding reduced. Prisoners also have human rights. Clearly, people have made mistakes and been judged worthy of punishment by society, but that doesn't mean the ultimate aim of prison ought to be the rehabilitation of those people who've been sent to prison. So you don't want a situation where they're being unnecessarily cruelly treated due to the crimes they've been committed.
What does one do with a prisoner who is sentenced to life in prison and with no prospect of making parole for 20 years? What are the prospects? What do you do with such a...
Well, I think in many cases you've seen people reflect on what they've done, come to terms with that. I mean, that's often something that takes many years, and then find a way that they themselves can process that and actually look to improve themselves as people. And ultimately that's what we all want from people who go to prison. I mean, we all want them to have a period of reflection, even if they've gone for stealing a bicycle to obviously much more serious crimes. We want those people to reflect on the deed that they've done and then come out resolute to make improvements in their own lives.
How easy would it be for the EU to provide some form of assistance to our prison system? For example, to have CCTV systems, to have a much higher level of security in terms of checking for contraband, like drugs. Drugs is a big problem within the prison system. I went in there some months ago, and some prisoners told me that it was far easier for them inside than it was on the outside. when we talk to the prison authorities, they talk about money. How easy would it be? Is there any way the EU can help?
Well, the European Union is giving 210 million euros over the next few years through to 2020 to assist Sri Lanka in a number of different areas related to particularly supporting development in the poorest rural areas of the country and also supporting the National Reconciliation Programme. So that's our principal focus, but we are always interested in hearing about and supporting good projects to support the overall improvement of human rights in the country. So if there was a way that we could do that, we'd certainly be willing to take a look at it. We're in regular dialogue with the government about their desires and what they would like to see us do, so we will continue that, and certainly supporting an improvement in prison conditions is something that we've done in other countries around the world.
It's a good job you don't have your phone, because probably our minister in charge of prisons is dialing you already.
Yes.
Or he's probably dialing a friend of Sri Lanka who's a member of the European Parliament. Mr. Deva's phone's probably ringing at the same time. But still, from a European perspective, are you encouraged by what is happening in Sri Lanka? Really encouraged, not only because the people of Sri Lanka have voted for a change in 2015 and so on, but are you encouraged by what has happened since and what is happening now?
I think it's a historic opportunity, a real once-in-a-generation opportunity to address some of these problems that have gone back to probably to the colonial era in terms of the tensions between different communities, find a way that they have a legitimate expression within a single Sri Lanka, and find a situation to some of the problems that have challenged the country since independence. So I think you have a real opportunity with the Constitution, with the process for accountability for crimes committed during the war, with the development that the government is looking to promote in terms of seeing benefits for everybody from the end of the conflict, and Sri Lanka's future as a hub in the region. I mean, these are all very realisable possibilities, but they will take a lot of leadership, a lot of work, a lot of dedication to actually achieve. So I think there's a huge amount of potential, but we can't be complacent about how things are going to go over the next few years.
And have you visited the former conflict areas? Do you do a lot of work there?
We do quite a lot of work both in Eastern Province and Northern Province, so I visit from time to time, go and have meetings with the various chief ministers and the governors in those areas, as well as some of the international organisations and local NGOs that we support in those areas. I mean, clearly it's a very different situation in Northern Province to how you find it in Western Province.
Yeah.
And I think in any country, if you see glaring inequalities, it's something that challenges you a little bit, whether that's in the United Kingdom or in Belgium or indeed in Sri Lanka. So I think there's something that could be done there to promote the development of those areas that are still lagging behind.
How many times have you been greeted with placards and saying, find these people, and they're my brother or sister, whatever?
I'm fortunate in that I probably don't attract the same attention that someone like Ban Ki-moon would, obviously, when he travels up there. But yes, I mean, we certainly see that, and we hear the sentiments, and obviously it's very wrenching to hear a mother who's talking about her only son who has been missing for 8 to 10 years, and the same for a wife who has lost her husband, or the father of her children, and I think these are very human stories, and it's almost impossible not to feel a sense of human emotion and empathy when you meet those people. And so I think we need to remember that for all the talk about the great processes and whatever, at the fundamental heart of it is actually individual people who have lost or are missing someone who is at the centre of their world.
And finally, Paul, I've had a number of viewers asking me this thing to ask you. What do you think of the program that our network, this company, has undertaken, which is it's called Gammadda, which is from village to village, where we go there and try and fix particular problems that the villagers are having, and so on. We do this all around the country. I don't know whether you've kept abreast of some of these programs. What do you think? How essential is it?
I think it's very important that people see that their needs are being addressed on a day-to-day basis. So I think that if your program is helping your viewers actually see in real time that they're able to find solutions to improve their lives and address some of the problems, I think that's great. I think that's
apart from showing our viewers, we actually go to these villages and supply whatever it is they want, they need, and which is outstanding, where for whatever reason officialdom hasn't fixed the problem, and so perhaps you may want to join us one of these days, and it's an ongoing program. Please be our guest, come and join us, and join one of the several teams that's around Sri Lanka in the mass of rurality. I call these people the forgotten people. I mean, forgotten until Sirasa Art Group got to them and engaged them and giving them what they've been waiting for a long time. So please be free to come on board and join us on the program.
I'd love to, thanks. That's a nice offer.
And thank you very much for being here, Paul Godfrey, on the International Day for the abolishing of the death penalty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsline. We'll be back here tomorrow, and where we're going to be talking about corruption. And we hope to have Mr. Gunasekara. It's bound to be an interesting morning. Do join us. Take care, have a great day, and God bless.